Go down. Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hey. Flip the mic towards your mouth a little bit also.
Towards the mouth. Awesome. Okay, it's not progressing. Maybe I have to click. That's odd. Okay, there we go. Hi, my name is Landon Gray. I'm a senior software consultant at TestDouble. We're a fully remote software consultancy working in all sorts of different languages, helping companies with their most challenging technical problems. You can find me on the socials, and yeah, I think that's about it. So my talk is about building AI community, which when I was thinking about it last night, I was like, the community part is the end of my talk. A lot of what I'm going to talk about right now is what kind of led up to me building a community. So I have a few goals for this talk. And one is to share a unique niche that I found. Am I allowed to pick this up?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
Good.
I'm really tall. There we go. So one of my goals is to share a unique niche that I discovered that I thought was pretty interesting, and I'm going to share that with you. My other goal is to demystify what it takes to build a machine learning project. So all of you are going to be AI experts by the end of this talk. So that's really great. But I'm really thankful for Paul and Allison's talk because they talked a lot about data, and it was very data-centric and data-focused, and how that data kind of goes into building models. I'm hoping that this talk can kind of go nicely with that. And the last part is just how I started a community online. So where did this all start? So I think around like 2015, I graduated from university. I audited an AI class at my college. I went to Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas, about 4 hours away from Dallas, I forget. But I had this question about model building, and primarily in my day-to-day work, I work in a programming language called like Ruby. But a lot of the models that you're seeing built, I'm guessing people are using different programming languages like Python, C++, I don't know what y'all built yours in. But nobody was using the programming language that I use in my day-to-day, which is Ruby, and it's a pretty developer-friendly language, and I enjoyed it, and I was just like curious, like, are there limitations to this language, and is that the reason why people aren't using it? And this is like a picture of the Ruby logo, and it turned out, like, what I discovered is the reason people weren't using Ruby is Ruby wasn't there first. In academia, a lot of people found R and Python and C++ and C. Don't use that, just kidding. And they were using all these tools, but Rubyists, they were developers, they didn't really know about data science and all these different things, and so they weren't kind of there on the ground floor inception, and academics were like pulling this into like their institutions and building models and doing data science work. And they created a lot of libraries were also being created around programming languages such as like Python and R that made it really easy to do complex computations and linear algebra and things. But Ruby wasn't quite there yet. So they kind of had us beat out, or Rubyists beat out on the library end. But then they also had them beat out on the other part, the other end, which is probably most important in my opinion, is the community aspect. So Python developers, they had a huge community. They had all these people in academia and industry like building all these different tools that they could leverage to build models and things. And Rubyists also didn't have that because I think part of it was they didn't have the technical background on the data science side. It's more on like the engineering side. So I was like, I wanna do something here. But I had no clue what to do. I studied computer science. We didn't talk a lot about AI, ML, and so I didn't really have the tools to go ahead and build my own model in Ruby. So I decided to enroll in a course. So this is a snapshot of the website Great Learning, and they had an AI course, which is the middle one I took, which was an artificial intelligence and machine learning course where you actually learn how to build out models. And again, it was in Python, and my thought was I'm going to try to adapt it and learn how to do this in Python, and then I'll move it over to Ruby. So that was a grind. That was like earlier this year, kind of the end of last year. It was a lot of learning Python and a lot of just late nights and weekends on top of my really intense computer science job, and also coming back to Rochester and spending time with my family, who's over there. Hi, family. And I was just like, it was really tiring. And so I was exhausted. I'm trying to figure out how to build these models in Python, and I'm getting nowhere closer to writing it in Ruby, which is what I really actually want to do. Like, that's why I decided to learn all of this. And so I did what any rational human being would do after being overwhelmed and having moved back to Rochester and, trying to do this really intense coursework and maintain a full-time job. I decided to apply to a conference because that's what you do. And so people hadn't really heard about building a lot of machine learning projects in Ruby. They actually, for some reason, decided to accept me. That was a joke. Nobody laughed. Come on, lighten up. But yeah, so then I ended up like pausing the course, emailing them and saying like, I don't think I can finish this and do a conference talk, but I'm doing a conference talk on AI and ML. So could you like pause it and I'll build this talk out and this project out? And they graciously did, but I never went back to the course because life got busy. So that began my journey of trying to figure out like, how do I actually build this Ruby model? So you all are going to get a full overview about how to build a machine learning project, which I think will be very useful if you're a company or an organization and you are organizational leader and you're trying to ask questions to kind of figure out which AI products are for you. You can kind of ask more critical questions by having this knowledge, because now you know how these projects are built and where you should be kind of pushing your focus. So I'm going to go over what is like a problem that we're going to tackle. There's also a step of collecting data. Then you have to spend a lot of time preparing that data. So thank you, Alice and Paul, for touching on that. We're gonna train a model, and then we can make predictions with that model. So first, the problem. What should I do? Well, I like simple things, so I decided I'm gonna predict the weather. That's easy. But specifically, the weather is like a big thing, precipitation, humidity, all these things. So I was like, that's a lot. I haven't done a lot of this. So I was going to predict max temperature. And so the next thing you got to do is you got to collect some data. And so I went to the National Centers for Environmental Information. They have some really great data sources. And I found a data source for Atlanta, Georgia, which the conference was going to be in for the Ruby conference. And I downloaded the data set. And it came out in like a CSV format. So, and then I got about like 63 years worth of like weather data. And then after I had pulled down the data, collected the data, you have to like clean the data. You can't just use the data as it is, because there's a lot of like not great stuff in the data. So when they collect it, sometimes there's like mistakes. Sometimes the data could be inaccurate. Oops, I skipped a step. So I imported the data, and yeah, so then I started the process of cleaning up the data. So there were 5 data. So the data has like a lot of parameters, like all sorts of things related to weather. I kind of wanted to cut down the scope a little bit more. And so I only picked 5 parameters. They had like a little data file that was like, these are some core values that you may want to consider using. So I used precipitation, snowfall, snow depth, maximum temperature, and minimum temperature, because I feel like all those things are somewhat correlated to max temperature. This isn't for production. This is just like a toy example. So there's probably better parameters or features that I could pick, but these are the ones I picked, and I just picked 5 to make it easy. So that's me pulling those out there. This is a data frame, which you can think of like as an Excel spreadsheet almost. It has rows and columns, and each row is just a different day's worth of weather taken, and then the columns are precipitation, snowfall, snow depth, the maximum temperature for that day, and the minimum temperature for that day. So now we have to go forth and clean the data, as I mentioned earlier. So what does cleaning entail? Well, you have to handle missing values. Sometimes there's going to be data points with just no values there for that day, no max temperature. Maybe the sensor broke or got jammed or something. So you have to do something with those. You have to clean up the outliers. So maybe one day the sun hit just right and it's at 1,000 degrees, or something very, very strange happened where you got like a negative number. You have to clean that up because you know it's not going to be negative 874. That's not a possible temperature. So you have to do something with that value. You have to fix malformed data. So maybe some glitch happened and the data got corrupted and it's not even a number. It's just a bunch of letters and strings and text. You have to do something with that. And then maybe for some reason the sensor took 2 readings that day and now you have duplicate data. So that data is getting counted twice when you're building your model. And so your model's maybe leaning more towards that data. You probably want to eliminate those duplications in your readings. So I wrote a little bit of code. You don't really have to know what this does. I try not to put too much code in it because, you know, it's the Ruby programming language, and also like people's eyes glaze over when you look at code. I mean, I'm an engineer, so when I look at client code, like sometimes my eyes glaze over, but then I have to read it. So, but this is just like me writing a little bit of code to like go and clean up and just remove the rows with like missing values. That's not the best way to do it, to handle rows with like missing values. There are like other ways to do it, but I just took a very primitive approach. You can do things like take an average of several days and then put the average in the missing value spot or something like that, depending on what your data set is. So that was a lot of work. Is anyone tired? Like, we just spent all this time like cleaning this data, and you know, I just want to be done. I want my model to work. I want ChatGPT. I want to, you know, put some popcorn on and ask it a bunch of questions. Well, it turns out, again, thank you, Allison and Paul, there's a ton of time and energy that goes into cleaning up data. ChatGPT, they don't just scrape the web, hopefully. I'm sure hopefully. They don't just scrape the web and just like dump it all into a model because you don't know if the values are correct. You're going to spend about 80% of your time data wrangling, cleaning it up, doing all this stuff that we did. And then you're going to spend a tiny, tiny bit of your time actually building the model. And I call this the web calls this the 80-20 rule of data science. So we did all our data cleaning and munging. Now we can finally train our model. So when we train our model, we're going to have to split the data up. So we're going to split the data in 2 segments. There's going to be a training segment and our testing segment. The training data or segment is going to be used to kind of train our model. And then we're going to hold out a set of the data as a testing segment, because you don't want to give the model all the data, because if it has all the data, it's just going to build a perfect model. Like all those dots that they showed up on the screen, it's going to draw a line through every single dot. And then when some new dot comes on that's like way off to the side or in a different spot, it's not going to be able to predict it because it's too closely fitted to that specific data. So we're going to hide about 20 to 30% of the data away, and we're going to use that to like test it to see how well the model performs based on the training data on like a test data set it doesn't know. And that's kind of how we evaluate it. So I choose a very simple model. I choose linear regression. And linear regression is an attempt to model the relationship between two variables by fitting a linear equation to the observed data. So this kind of goes back to kind of what they were saying about explainability. Like ChatGPT and a lot of these large language models, they're very, 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 very complex. And if you ask me or anyone in this room or anyone at OpenAI or Sam Altman himself or God, what they're doing, maybe not God, he probably knows, but what they're doing, like nobody knows. Like it's a very, 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 very complex answer because they're doing very, 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 very complex things. But linear regression is a little bit simpler. You may recognize this equation, y equals mx plus b. If you don't recognize it, I want you to call your 8th grade teacher up right now and tell them, I'm sorry, I was at an AI conference and I don't remember that equation you told us. But I Googled it. Apparently we were supposed to have learned this around 8th grade. I'm still kind of vague on it, but But what we're going to do with linear regression is say we have a bunch of plotted data points on a graph, and say those data points happen to be one of those variables or parameters that we had in our data set, and say that was average snowfall. Those are a bunch of points for average snowfall. Now I know it probably won't look like this in your data set, but just imagine. So when we use linear regression, when we draw that line, what we want to do is draw a best fit line, a line that minimizes the distance between all those points through those points that can get close enough to all those points to kind of be our predictive sort of model. So it's a very primitive predictive model. You're just drawing a line, and then based on that line, you're gonna, if somebody wants to make a prediction on the X and Y axis, they're just gonna stick their finger on that line and say, like, this is our prediction. And it's always gonna be off. Neural networks are far more effective models for predicting data points, but this is just a simple model, and it's very simple to explain. So we draw a best fit line, and that's kind of what it's gonna look like. But then we have this problem. Okay, you said we had 5 features. We just did 1. And what do we do if we have multiple features? Well, you can use multiple linear regression, and you can imagine, and I put this graph here because in my last talks, people were like, how do you do multiple lines though on a 2D? It gets very complex. So this is just kind of help us to imagine, maybe you have max temperature points and you draw the best fit line for that, and then maybe you have snowfall and you draw a best fit line for that, and a minimum temperature and you draw the best fit line for that. The numbers are kind of fuzzy here and it doesn't quite correlate, but that's a great visual to kind of what's happening. And then what actually happens when you say build a linear regression model? What is it doing? Oops. It's doing that. So that is an equation for multilinear regression. If we think about the whole y equal mx plus b, we still have the x. So for the first parameter, you have an x here. So it could be your slope and your x value. And then for your other parameter, it's your slope and your x value. And then you have the b, which is the y-intercept, which is here. And then there's the y. And then that thing at the end that says b, that's the error. That's all the noise that, our prediction's not going to be, our model's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a little bit off. And that's the error for all that. But basically I would program that into a mathematical function and run that. That's what would give us our prediction or our model creation. So, and this is just a small code snippet to kind of show you, it's not, when developers are developing it, there's not a ton that they have to do. Obviously there's more code behind this small little bit, but that's effectively running that equation. So now we're done. And now that we're done, we can make some predictions. So you can say, here's a set of 5 values. I'm going to put it into our predict in our model, and out pops a prediction. And you can do that for any day, and it's going to be somewhat accurate, but there are better models to predict the weather, it turns out, not linear regression. So we went through our problem. We wanted to predict the weather. We collected some data. We did data preparation. We trained the model. We made predictions. Now you're all experts in AI and ML. Go forth and do great things. So this is my original talk. It was a little bit more technical and focused more on Ruby on Rails. But when I gave this talk, Rubyists didn't really have any exposure to this model building because not a lot of people had been doing it. So a lot of people came out. And so that got me thinking, what more can I do? My goal is to see everybody else do really awesome, great things. Max is doing that with AI education. That's why we're all here, and we're all going to get fired up and do more. So I was kind of thinking the same thing, how do I get people excited? And I wanted to start a little community of people doing kind of what I was, where I was at, kind of doing similar things. So I started a group on Twitter. I don't know how I feel about it now, but it's there. And I just asked a couple people like, hey, you're in an adjacent space to me. Would you want to like join this group and like talk about this? And turns out people did. Like in the first week or so, I think the first day was like 30 people, and it was like 60 people after 3 days, and then 100 people joined. And I was like, people are really interested in this. And like, you shouldn't be using Ruby to build your models, but but it's fun, like for hobbyists and things. And then someone said like, hey, not everybody's really down with Twitter. Like, could we put some stuff on Mastodon and launch a group there? And I was like, sure, like this isn't my thing. Like, do whatever we want. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna do that and say we did it together. And he was like, he went forth and created this group, and I was like, cool. So now there's another group of people talking, and now we have a community of people who want to build AI models and products and things in Ruby. And who would have ever thought that was a thing you could do? But it's not so much about building, is it? It's more about like finding the people. So like people already kind of wanted to do this thing, and I just kind of stumbled in and was like, hey, I did some stuff, and people were like, cool. And so I kind of found my community. We were talking about isolation earlier. You know, this is a great way to like reduce the isolation thing. Like this is a great way AI can help, is like creating communities of people who want to do things together. And I think that's overall good for humanity. And it doesn't have to be Ruby. Like, if I'm gonna get like super meta here, it doesn't even have to be AI, it's just finding community. That's what we as humans do. And I don't want us to lose that with AI. So find your community. So I have a challenge for all of you. So we're at a conference. My challenge is that just, if you see someone that you haven't met before, just introduce yourself and meet them, just one person. And that doesn't really have much to do with my talk other than its community, but yeah, try to meet someone new. Unfortunately, this quote is no longer true because I just saw a talk that Lawson gave where we could now talk to robots. But for the most part, about 20 minutes ago, I knew this was true. You will be the same person in 5 years as you are today, except for the people that you meet and the books you read. And that's why AI community is important, or any sort of community. So with that, I just want to thank you. I want to thank the AI community that I'm a part of with Ruby AI. I want to thank Great Learning for the great training materials. I want to thank Max for putting this on. And I'm really excited for what's going to happen in the future in Rochester. My other talk, I have a GitHub repository. The day isn't gray on GitHub. And if you go here, you can kind of check out, I have a Jupyter notebook where I actually have the code that I did for my original talk. You can kind of see what Ruby looks like in building a model. So thank you very much.
Grab the other mic, Landon.
Okay, cool.
So I just have a couple questions to kind of work backwards a little bit. I want to start with community. The entire ethos, at least on the back end of this talk, was about finding community, whether it's an AI or not, sometimes collaborating, sharing. It's not the most competitive outlook, and you're in a space that's really competitive right now. How do you sort of exist in that space that is demanding innovation and is very competitive with your own desire to share, collaborate, and find community?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a paradox. Because it's like, it is competitive in the sense that like companies are trying to survive and build products that people will buy, because if they don't have money, they won't be able to stay afloat. But what I've noticed just from being on Twitter is like a lot of people are just building their knowledge and just sharing it for free. Like there's this one guy, Andre Karpathy, he's like the director of basically AI at Tesla and is building self-driving cars. He's just giving these lectures in his free time and just putting them up on YouTube and saying like, hey, there's literally, you should all Google it. I'm working my way through it, but there's a 1-hour video intro on like, how does an LLM work for everyone? It's like, you don't have to be a PhD PhDs are great, by the way, great talk. But you don't have to know everything, but it's just like, hey, this is an intro to everyone on understanding these really complex topics. Because for me, what got me into this, and this is the community part, is a lot of people feel, myself included, that this is too complex for us to understand. Like, I need to spend every moment, and that's somewhat true. Like, there's going to be a lot of nuance. Like, once you get into the nitty gritty of like you're building an LLM, you're going to have to know a lot of stuff. But on a high level, people want to understand, and that will bring people together because we learn from each other, you know, and that's kind of what I'm still doing. I'm still trying to learn. I actually don't know how LLMs work. Spoiler.
Are you finding, well, you said that early on, the response to the community you're trying to create was immediate, it was really strong. Does that tell you there's a lot of like-minded people who at least want to be able to sort of rising tide and lift all boats here?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a ton of like-minded people who are just out there, and you discover things. It's like, again, it's like finding community. I feel like more than building community. You discover there were already pockets of people, and you just didn't have access to them. Like, I found a Discord community of a bunch of people doing Ruby stuff that someone made, and you know, you'll go on Reddit and you'll find groups of people that you never thought you would meet. So
here's my kind of ignorant question. I try to do at least one of these for all of your wonderful presentations. I'm watching your presentation, and you talked about finding 63 years of weather data. I forget the source of it there.
Yeah.
But I mean, but you obviously you're finding great data, and then you got to clean up the data, but you can go pretty deep with it. And for some reason, what that called to mind for me was when I was teaching a few years ago. I was an adjunct at Nazareth, and even basic research that I was assigning, I was finding college students were really struggling to find good answers. And to the point where I didn't think it was an unreasonable ask that I could find the data if I was looking for it, and I didn't know why they weren't asking the right questions. So there's so much data out there, and do you think our society is getting worse at actually finding it and sifting through it? Is there too much noise? Are we not training kids in their early student years to become good researchers and thinkers and data analysts?
Yeah, I want to go back to what Masim said. I feel like education's a little bit like broken because for me, it's not. I don't know if everybody's necessarily getting like the same thing. I remember growing up in grade school, I was like kind of bored, and I was in a library, and they were telling us like, stop using Wikipedia and saying it's a source in your bibliofile. And I was just like, what are you talking about? It's the most accurate thing. And they said, scroll down and look at the sources that are there. And like, that is something that's like, I'm deeply worried. Like, among all the things in our country and the world that I'm worried about, it's education. You know, like, I'm worried that someone, you know, missed an opportunity on some like wide-eyed kid who's learning about whatever, or who's really interested and is engaged. Children are naturally engaged. I'm worried that they're getting like missed and they're not having attention given to them, and someone's showing them like, hey, here's a better way to find a source. Like this, you're not born knowing this stuff. Someone taught me how to tie my shoes. Someone taught me how to build this model. This talk is modeled off of another guy who gave a talk who has like 40,000 views, and I like adapted it to try to use Ruby. And like, I'm learning stuff every day from other people, you know, and these AIs that we're generating, they're coming from knowledge that we have, and hopefully, you know, it's getting shared wider. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of deviated from your question.
No, that's exactly, because when I think about what schools are going to have to teach in regards to the changing tech and AI, and it's happening really fast, schools have to get on board really fast, but they're not necessarily experts in certain fields. And it's going to take, revolution's the wrong word, but it's going to take a big change in how we are training kids to think, how to search for information, how to identify noise and bad information. And that's not just for kids who want to go into AI and tech development, but that's for all of us. And so I really appreciated watching you do what you do here, and I think it piggybacks on the previous talk, and I think there's just a lot of really smart ideas about how that's happening. I just want to make sure it translates to the lay public, because I wish everyone had all of your sort of approach to knowledge acquisition, et cetera. We don't necessarily always see that, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah. I think it's really the human problem. It's not AI
Yeah.
problem. We have to talk more with one another. We have to reach out and say, hey, I want to do an AI conference, and like, who else wants to do this with me? And we just need to work together and do fun things and learn along the way.
We've got time for a little bit from the audience before lunch. I know everyone's hungry, but
Yeah. I'll open up actually. I'm going to go back to a technical question.
Yeah.
For the Rubyists out there, what libraries were you using for the data frames, for the model training, and stuff like that?
Yeah, so for the data frames, I use a data frame library written in Ruby called Daru, but I have a friend, Paul Reese, who just gave, I was in San Diego to give a talk on another library called Polars, which I think you can use in Python too for your data cleaning. And that's probably like the one I would use. Honestly, for model building, PyTorch and like TensorFlow and all these libraries, there's a lot of like Ruby wrappers around that if you want to use like Ruby to kind of build out projects. And those just like drill into those other libraries. I would honestly probably recommend that. So,
Thanks.
yeah.
Any questions from the audience?
anyone else before lunch? Here comes Max.
Hi, I'm Jess. And
Hi, Jess.
This crew is from Buffalo.
I love Buffalo.
Hey, shout out to the Buffalo crew.
And we're so enthusiastic to be here and really wanted to support what's happening in Rochester. And I appreciate your talk. And I guess I'm curious from a non-AI perspective, just an educational perspective, what additional types of learning, development, educational certifications would you need to level up your experience and your knowledge here for the next best thing? And how can other people who are in this audience kind of know the difference between the technical skills that we have to practice and the philosophical skills that we need to develop?
So you're asking me what I would need, or are you in your space?
Either or.
Either or. I think it's communication, honestly. I mean, that sounds like a cheap answer, but like talking with other people who know other things, sharing ideas, like not, I think part of it's like humility, like to go into a space and like ask questions. Like we have the internet and there are forums. Sometimes they're toxic and you ask a question and people call you dumb or stupid. And it's like, I don't think that's helpful. So like being more human, being kinder, and trying to find people where you're at in the spaces that you're at, and like building relationships and asking questions. I feel like that's a lot of what I've been trying to do. Like if something interesting happens on LinkedIn or I see an article, there's a lot of like humans who like are really excited about the stuff that they're doing. So like you can email someone at the New York Times and like ask questions and then build relationships with that, journalist. Or you can message someone on LinkedIn and ask questions. And those people who are in the spaces are giving like resources for people to learn. Like I am not an AI expert. My field is like software development, software engineering. And so clients come to me asking questions about how to set up their infrastructure or how to better develop interactive web applications for their end users. And so I give them the information that I have. But yeah, I think trusting people who are in those spaces and asking them this is where I'm at, like what other resources can be useful for me to level up to my next stage. Again, I think it's like that human aspect. I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
I have great affection for your approach. I would love to see more of it in this field. Thank you, Landon. Great. Applause for Landon. That was awesome.
Thank you all.
Anything about lunch, sir?
Lunch, it's outside. We'll be back the next talk.